Take 3. Abortive canal, still visible. Cross-state water job started 110 years ago. This story appeared in the August 17, 1947 issue of the Saginaw News. Like forgotten graves, a few grassy mounds in the western part of Saginaw County lie in obscurity, unnoticed and unremembered by passers-by. They are graves, in fact, graves of two great dreams that flourished a century apart. They were dreams that would have made 5 Michigan rivers parts of a network of canals that would have linked the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Great Lakes. A geographic quirk that was caused by the glaciers of an unrecorded ice age had long intrigued engineers. Lake Saginaw, in prehistoric days, was an exaggeration of the present Saginaw Bay. It reached well beyond St. Charles, and it covered half of today's Thumb area. Lake Chicago covered the lower half of what is now Lake Michigan and indented the western Michigan coast to where Grand Rapids now stands. Geological surveys show that these two bodies of water were joined by an ancient river that flowed in the present valleys of the Bad and Maple rivers. Today, as when the state was new in 1837, those two rivers, the Bad and the Maple, are only 3 miles apart, although they flow in opposite directions. The highest point between them is only 72 feet above sea level. The first Constitution of Michigan, adopted in 1835, called upon the legislature to encourage public improvements, especially roads and canals. In an age where water transportation had opened the Northwest Territory and the great mass of European immigrants had traveled to Michigan over the new Erie Canal, it was natural that engineers sought to utilize existing waterways and to extend them by interlocking canals. By digging a canal for 20 miles westward from the forks of the Bad Lakes, Michigan, and Huron could be joined. To the enterprising men of Saginaw City, it was an opportunity to make the tiny lumbering town a metropolis, and they rose to the challenge. I will pause here from the actual reading of the text because I don't think that Saginaw was just a tiny lumbering town. It turned into the lumber capital of the world in the 1880s, 1890s. But I digress. Let's continue on with the story. Norman Little, whose name is closely woven into the history of Saginaw, was given the contract to dig the 90-foot wide, 9-foot deep canal, and work began in 1838. 100 Irishmen, fresh from the old sod and of the Erie and of the same tough breed of swamps terriers who had built the Erie Canal, pick and shovel, loaded earth into wheelbarrows, and began inching their laborious way to the west. Supplies had to be toted over Indian trails from the nearest white settlement 15 miles away. Costs mounted. Anonymous laborers died from cholera and were buried in unmarked graves far from their native Erin. Their only consolation was a free-flowing whiskey, and legend has it that to this very day the wraiths of long-dead Irishmen roam the lowlands of St. Charles seeking a barrel of fine liquor that they had buried there. It was buried there, so the legend goes, in the fall of 1839 when the men were told that the work was to be halted. Thinking that the layoff was only for the winter, they buried wheelbarrows, tools, provisions, and a barrel of molasses with the whiskey. When they came back to Saginaw City, they found bad news. No temporary layoff, the halt was final. The state had issued $5 million in bonds, which were sold to the Morris Canal and Banking Company. The company failed before the money had even been paid to the state, and the Northern Canal was no more. During the 2 years of construction, the state spent $22,256.81, little more than the city of Saginaw will spend for new sidewalks this year, but then a large sum. Marks of the old job still exist today. On the old Chad Curtis farm, a mile southeast of Brant, there are mounds, now gentle and overgrown with big trees, that were the banks of the old canal. The old course of the Bad River can still be discerned, while the stream now flows in a course to which it was diverted from the canal in 1838. 3 miles west of St. Charles, on the Brant Road, a few yards west of the bridge across the south branch of the Bad River, the canal is best preserved. It can easily be seen from an auto, and a short walk on the Kenneth Wilson farm is a trip into history. 10 years after the Northern Canal was abandoned, a Saginaw company was incorporated to complete the project. Stock for the $200,000 was offered for sale, but found no takers as the California gold rush siphoned off the get-rich-quick element and left only conservative and skeptical folks behind. The company died at Bourning. Just who resurrected the old dream is not known, but on September 30th, 1908, the Grand Saginaw Valley Deep Waterway Association was formed at Grand Rapids. Byron G. Coryell of Chesaning was its first president, the first man to open a bank in Saginaw County. Outside of Saginaw, he was a dynamic leader. While seeking to utilize the same great natural trough that bisects the state, the new canal was to differ on the Saginaw end. From Grand Haven on Lake Michigan, the waterway was to follow the Grand River through Grand Rapids, Lowell, and Ionia to the mouth of the Maple near Muir. Then, up the Maple, it would follow the river to a point about 4 miles south of Ashley. From there, a 7-mile cut to the Shiawassee between Chesaning and Owasso would give access to the river, the Saginaw Bay, and thence to Lake Huron. 4 locks would raise the canal barges over 72-foot crest. One at Grand Rapids would be 28 feet, and one at Ionia 23 feet. A 30-foot cut would have been made through the crest. At Brant, boats would drop 23 feet, and at St. Charles, 28. Slack water channels above dams at each of these points would have been 21 feet deep and 160 feet wide. The same arguments now attending the St. Lawrence waterway were proposed then. Most urged was the fact that transportation would be quicker and cheaper. $1 would haul freight then costing $26 on railroads, proponents prophesied. But others were even more glamorous. Dr. G.L. Lane, state geologist, said there were rich gold deposits near Lowell. He also predicted accurately this time that oil and gas deposits in the center of the state would someday be a source of great wealth. Others pointed to the peat deposits in the riverlands and Saginaw County's coal, most of which has now all been mined. Hydroelectric power was to ring a new era of easy life. Steel plants to rival Pittsburgh would locate near St. Charles. Salt industries would revive, and brick kilns would spring up like mushrooms after a rain. Soon, the lake-to-lake vision became too narrow. The word was now ocean to Gulf. A proposed canal from Georgian Bay through Ontario to the Ottawa River and the St. Lawrence at Montreal would open the Atlantic to the Saginaw River. The Chicago Canal, which was later contemplated, would link Lake Michigan to the Mississippi and then the Gulf of Mexico. Other localities began seeking the pot of gold that lay buried on much of Michigan's river bottoms. The National Waterways Commission proposed a 14-foot canal by way of the Maumee River in Indiana to link Lakes Erie and Michigan and bypass Lake Huron. There, too, a century-old canal lays abandoned in the Hoosier landscape. Another group sought a canal linking St. Joseph and Monroe by way of Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, and Jackson. Opposition was bitter, and in the days when newspaper editors wielded invective enthusiastically, grew vituperative. Why do people use words that you don't know and are just as hard to speak? But anyways, critics doubted that the project would cost no more than an estimated $10 million. Railroad lobbies were active in Congress, where considerable support had developed to make the canal a federal project. But it was finally apathy, rather than opposition, that killed the dream. The city of Saginaw had, between 1909 and 1913, taken active sponsorship of the waterway. But on New Year's Day 1914, a new commission form of government replaced the old aldermanic system. Eager to prove the worth of the newly adopted charter, and perhaps mend political fences by projects closer to home, the city fathers completely forgot the vision of linking the lakes. The project died so fast and so completely that after 1913, no mention of it is made in any official